Hi, everyone. It's time to do an Instagram live with my friend Neal Katyal. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope everybody's well. You had a good holiday, and thank you guys for joining. I haven't done this for a while. I got bangs. That's my very exciting news. And my daughter's pregnant. Yay. That's also very exciting. Happy New Year, everybody. Neal Katyal is going to give us an update because I don't know about you, but I tried to tune out some of the, you couldn't tune out a lot of the news, sadly, over the holidays, but I wasn't paying that much attention to what was going on with various trials and the legal travails of one President Donald J. Trump, former President Donald J. Trump. So we got Neal to agree to come on and talk to us. And so here he is. Hi, Neal.
Hello, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great to see you as always. How
Ditto.
how were your holidays?
Holidays were pretty good. A lot of work, of course, and keeping up with the Trumps is always its own challenge.
Did
But
you take
uh,
any kind of break at
I
all?
did. I know I did. And now I've got some big oral arguments coming up, including the Supreme Court.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's hitting a little hard, but it was good to have a few days.
Good. Good. Well, I wrote a whole introduction. Should I read it just because we wrote it?
Sure.
Okay, it's the beginning of a new year with the same old story. The election is 10 months and 3 days away, and Donald Trump remains the front runner for the Republican nomination by a fairly wide margin. I was supposed to get the latest poll, but I forgot. But some other numbers are not so favorable. In Washington, D.C., he faces 4 felony counts for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. In Georgia, he faces 13 counts for his election interference in that state. In New York, he faces 34 felony counts in connection with hush money payments to an adult film star, aka Stormy Daniels. And in Florida, he faces 40 felony counts for hoarding classified documents after he left office and impeding the government's efforts to retrieve them. Add them all up, and we have 4 criminal cases, 91 felony counts, 5 separate trials in the new year, and verdicts in 2 civil cases that could cost his business hundreds of millions of dollars and send him potentially to prison. We're talking about the criminal cases. To make sense of all of this, I wanted to talk to my friend Neal Katyal, the former acting Solicitor General of the United States, Georgetown University law professor, and legal expert on constitutional law, criminal law, and intellectual property, and a pretty good skier, I might add. Anyway, Neal, let's start by talking about the 14th Amendment, Section 3. You want me to turn comments off? What do you guys? Okay, I will. I'll turn comments off. If they can be really distracting. So remember, you guys, if you have questions for Neal, you can put them in the questions section. We solicited a number of questions, Neal, on social media that we tried to incorporate into these questions. But let's start with the 14th Amendment,
Yeah.
Section 3. Colorado and Maine have both ruled to disqualify Donald Trump from the presidential ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So can you just walk us through what Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says specifically? And then I'm going to tell you how the Trump legal team is challenging it. But why don't you have at it?
Yeah, so Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War, basically says that if you gave aid and comfort to an insurrectionist or you are an insurrectionist, that you're barred from holding public office unless Congress votes to remove that disability. And, this is not something that has come up because generally we don't put insurrectionists or those who give aid and comfort to insurrectionists on our presidential ballots. But, certainly it was a big fear at the end of the Civil War that very thing would happen. So what the Colorado court did is it looked at that provision and it had a 5-day hearing. Evidence was presented. Donald Trump had the ability to defend himself and say he wasn't an insurrectionist and the like. And at the end of it, the judge said, the evidence shows, Mr. Trump, that you are an insurrectionist. She said, however, that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to candidates for presidential office, that the president is not an office under the Constitution. I think everyone thought that that reasoning was really weak, and the Colorado Supreme Court
This is
didn't
the
really.
one who dissented.
Well, so there were three dissenting justices in Colorado. It was a 4-3 decision. Two of them were purely on other state law grounds, which aren't even relevant to, as the case goes, to the United States Supreme Court. Um, there is not really, I think, strong support for the idea that the presidency is not an office under the Constitution. And even the trial judge herself said it's kind of crazy that the founders of the 14th Amendment would have left out the most important office of all. And lo and behold, in the congressional debates over the 14th Amendment, this actual question comes up with one person saying, one member of Congress saying, hey, shouldn't we include the president? And the answer by one of the sponsors of the 14th Amendment is it says any position, and any means any, it includes the
What
president. So
year was that, Neal?
1868. And
Okay.
so I don't think there's any real debate about whether the president is an office holder. Trump will try and make that
Well,
argument, but I
let
don't think
me
it's a good one.
read this
Yeah.
quote from Newsweek. In their appeal against the Colorado lawsuit, Trump's lawyers reiterated that the wording of Section 3 does not apply to people running for president, and that Trump technically did not swear an oath to support the Constitution. Instead, during his January 2017 inauguration, Trump swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution during his role as president. And let me just finish because it's fascinating. The framers excluded the office of president from Section 3 purposefully, Trump's legal team wrote. Section 3 does not apply because the presidency is not an office under the United States. The president is not an officer of the United States. I know you just referred to that. And President Trump did not take an oath to support the Constitution of the United States. Neal, that sounds insane to me.
Yeah, you don't need to be a lawyer. And, I think when Representative Bingham drafted the 14th Amendment, he wrote it in clear and simple terms, things like equal protection of the law and the like. And, the relevant language I'll read to you is, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States, who, having previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall engage in insurrection or rebellion against the same or give aid and comfort. So basically, the key language is any office. President was holding an office. The Constitution refers to the presidency as an office. I don't think that this is a serious argument. Trump's better argument is that the 14th Amendment isn't what he calls self-executing. It means you need a law of Congress in order to implement it. That's a more technical argument. It would have grave repercussions for other parts of the 14th Amendment, like the Equal Protection Clause, which nobody has thought would ever require congressional legislation.
Right.
So it's a tough argument, but it's something that could give the court a hat to hang a hook to hang their hat on if they're looking for some sort of technical way out. I think this is a hard case for the court because no matter what it does, some people in this country are going to feel like either they're ignoring the plain text of the Constitution and giving Trump a benefit, and it's a Republican-nominated Supreme Court. That's what some people will say.
Right.
Or the opposite, which is if they affirm Colorado's decision to keep him off the ballot, it's going to be the Supreme Court's injecting itself into presidential politics.
Well, let's get to that in a second. Before we talk about the Supreme Court's role in all of this, I just want for our listeners, viewers, whatever, that Michigan wouldn't take him off the ballot, along with several other states. So I guess have either refused to hear these cases.
Yeah, but I don't think that's really relevant, Katie, because those are all based on individual state law questions.
But wait, let me just finish, Neal, because there's still 17 more states that have so-called unresolved challenges. So I guess my question is, as a non-lawyer, how do they decide what case goes all the way to the Supreme Court?
Well, the justices have their pick, and they can pick any of them. And here, I'm sure, almost certainly, they'll pick the Colorado case just because it's teed up, ready to go. Most states do not have laws like Colorado's, or many states don't, that allow for an election challenge in the primary to the qualifications of a candidate, but Colorado does. That's why you see so many of these other states, like California, siding against these challenges. It's not that they're saying Trump isn't an insurrectionist. It's not that they're saying the 14th Amendment doesn't apply. They're simply saying state law provides no mechanism for an individual citizen or voter to bring the challenge. Now, I think that there is force to this idea that the Supreme Court shouldn't be picking presidential
Well,
candidates, but
they did it in 2000, Neal.
they certainly did. And I think the more important point is this is exactly what the founders of the 14th Amendment wrote the language about. And it's no different than if my kid who's under 35 wanted to be president, or if Barack Obama wanted to be president for a third term, or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Janet Granholm ran for the presidency, even though they're not natural born citizens. Our Constitution takes all of those off the table and says those are not things. If you don't meet these minimum qualifications, you can't be president, no matter how many people want you to be president, love you, and the like. So that then sets up Trump's other argument. His other argument is, I haven't been criminally convicted. And that's what you need for the 14th Amendment. And that's why I read the language of the 14th Amendment earlier. It just doesn't say anything about criminal conviction. This is a really odd argument for Donald Trump to make, since he's the one who's been saying he's a strict constructionist of the Constitution and follows the text of the Constitution. You can stare at that text every day. You'll never find criminal conviction in there.
Well, let's talk. I mean, since you bring up strict constructionists and so-called originalists, people who really believe the Constitution should be interpreted as it was written, when it was written, rather than judicial activists who believe it's kind of a living, breathing, changing document that can be altered under different circumstances. So I guess the question is, what do you think, Neal, the Supreme Court is going to do? Because if in fact they're strict constructionists, to your point, as Donald Trump claims to be, will they have to follow what the 14th Amendment Section 3 says?
Yeah. So I do think this is one in which the lawyering is going to matter. And if the lawyering is focused on the methodology of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court, strict construction, plain text, ignore policy consequences, all the things that they've been saying in cases like Dobbs and so many others, I think it's a winnable case and that the Colorado decision would be affirmed. I do think that you'd want to have the advocates really focus on that methodology. It was the same thing we used last year in Moore versus Harper, the big election independent state legislature case, in which, again, there were so many different ways to argue the case, but the way we ultimately settled on was to reason from originalist premises. And I think the same thing is true here. And remember, the Supreme Court there, 6-3, sided against the Republican National Committee and all those people. And if they'd won that case, it would have entrenched really Republican domination in presidential elections and in and in congressional elections for decades. But the Supreme Court did the right thing. And I think it's fully capable of doing the right thing again. So it's just, to me, a question of how the thing is argued.
Well, let's talk about some of the justices you're going to be keeping an eye out on, or keeping an eye on. I keep hearing about John Roberts. I keep hearing about Brett Kavanaugh. Can you talk about just sort of, it's sort of reading the tea leaves, but who you're going to be looking at in terms of how they rule on this case?
Well, I think it's hard without the briefing. We haven't seen the briefing yet. The court hasn't even agreed to hear the case.
But just kind of given the way they've made decisions in the past.
Yeah. So I think the Chief Justice plays an outsized role, and particularly in a case like this. So I would be looking to him at oral argument in particular. But I think this case is winnable for any of the nine. I think it's totally, the text of the Constitution is what the text of the Constitution is. And, if Donald Trump doesn't like it, go and persuade Congress to lift the disability. That's what the 14th Amendment says. It says it gives him a way out, which is if he can persuade Congress to vote to remove the disability. And I suspect he can't, and that tells you a lot.
Well, let's talk about, well, first of all, when do you think the Supreme Court will hear this? Can you give us any kind of timeline?
I think they'll probably vote to hear it quite soon, and I think they could hear it in the February sitting. So I think there's nothing that would prevent something like that. And I think it should happen quickly because there is this cloud of uncertainty. And in Bush versus Gore, of course, that was the language the court used to try and say we have to jump into this right now. And so I think it's similarly true here.
I just want to ask you sort of, even though this isn't truly your bailiwick, a lot of people have said this would be a terrible thing for the country to have the Supreme Court disqualify Donald Trump, that he needs to be defeated at the ballot box. And David Axelrod, I'm sure you've heard this, he's recently said the Maine decision plays into Trump's claims that Democrats are politically motivated. I guess that was decided by the Secretary of State of Maine differently than Colorado. So, I guess the question is, what do you think of the criticism that this is not the way to tackle the Donald Trump problem?
Well, I agree with it in part. I mean, I would much prefer to beat him at the ballot box. But I really don't think it's right that provisions of the Constitution be read out of existence. And would it be horrible for the Supreme Court to be siding in a way against one presidential candidate? Sure. But I think our founders of the 14th Amendment thought it'd be even worse for the country if an insurrectionist or someone who gave aid and comfort ascended to that office. And so that's the compromise that was written in the 1860s into the document. And again, the founders gave Trump a way out, which is he can try and persuade Congress to remove the disability. So
are you worried at all that this sets a precedent, Neal? That's another argument that's been made.
Well,
it could open
I'll tell you, I'm more worried about the precedent set by having an insurrectionist in the White House. So, if we want to talk about precedent, I think that's the one that is more worrisome to me. But sure, I get that. I do think it's really hard, frankly, to label someone an insurrectionist or to say they've given aid and comfort. That's not something that, frankly, any president has been accused of in the past. It's a really low bar. Donald Trump has managed not to clear it. But I think, normal presidential candidates will clear it every day and every week.
Some conservatives have considered using it against Kamla Harris, who raised bail money for those jailed during the violence following the murder of George Floyd. They said this should be considered an insurrection against the Constitution. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I think that's just so ridiculous. It has nothing to do with insurrection in the way that the founders of the 14th Amendment said it. It's just like, it's stupid constitutional law and not really worth our time to talk about.
Before we go to the other cases, we're just going to do a quick rundown to kind of give a status report, Neal, on some of these other cases. But I just would like to summarize what you've told us. You believe that the Supreme Court could hear the Colorado case most likely as soon as February, and that there's a good chance that they will uphold that ruling.
Correct.
Okay. That's pretty stunning.
Yeah, I mean, and it just shows how remarkable the time is that we're in a situation in which Donald Trump, what he did what he did on January 6th, refuses to take responsibility for what he did. Trying now, as we'll talk about in a moment, I mean, he's been criminally indicted by grand juries all over the place, and he's so afraid of trial. He's trying to push his trial off as far as he can in order to try and become president so that he can nullify those trials.
I wanted to ask you, I have this question at the end, but since you brought it up, I listened to the Daily this morning and Maggie Haberman was talking about how Donald Trump is really going to try to not really run the clock, but try to beat the clock by getting enough delegates to be the GOP nominee for President of the United States before any of these trials take place. Even if that happened, even if like Super Tuesday, and I guess California changed their to winner take all and blah blah, and some of these states have now switched the way they're doing business that will favor Donald Trump. Let's say he does get enough delegates, Neal, before any of these trials actually take place. How would that protect him from the criminal, ramifications of all these
Right.
charges?
What his hope is through all of these different delay tactics, and we can talk about which ones they are in a moment, but his hope is basically to make it so that the votes for delegates happen before he's criminally convicted, because the American public generally trusts juries. And a jury conviction that says Donald Trump is an insurrectionist will have a dramatic effect on how people, will see him. So that's what his game is, to try and do that. Now, if he's convicted, he can still run for president. Um, and if he wins, then at the federal level, what he will do, even if he's convicted, he'll file a motion for bail pending appeal, which means he'll be out free until his appeal is done. And his appeal will take years. And so he can just order the Justice Department, Solicitor General, to drop the appeal, throw in the towel, and effectively end that criminal prosecution. You don't even have to get into questions about pardoning the president, pardoning himself, or anything like that. If he's the president, he can order the Justice Department to drop his case.
Oh, because it will be alive because it'll be on appeal.
Correct. Exactly. Now, the state case, he can't do that. He doesn't have that power, but he has a fairly strong constitutional argument that no state can jail the president of the United States. Because if you think about, like, if it's 1862 and South Carolina tried to jail Lincoln, how would, structural constitutional principles would generally say one state can't undo the nation's business. So he would have a reasonably strong argument there to nullify the Georgia criminal prosecution as well.
That's why I guess time is of the essence for many of these
Correct.
cases. Let's just quickly go through them. And if you guys are just joining us, I'm obviously talking to my friend Neal Katyal about what the Supreme Court is going to be doing about the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that says insurrectionists cannot run for president. So let's talk about E.G. Carroll. The defamation trial in New York is slated to start on January 16th. It focuses on comments Trump made about Carroll while he was president and then after the $5 million verdict, when he continued to trash her publicly, calling her a whack job. The trial will be for damages only because of the jury's findings in the other case, and it's expected to last 3 to 5 days. Is this going to have a big impact or not really?
I don't think so. It made some impact on Trump's finances, but otherwise, no.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the election interference case, which is sort of, I don't know. I guess a lot of them are big ones, but I feel like this is kind of the mother of all the trials, because it deals with insurrection. It's scheduled to begin March 4th. What's happening there?
So there is a delay because Trump has claimed as president he is absolutely immune and can't be criminally prosecuted for actions he took while president. This is, to put it mildly, an insane constitutional theory. The Supreme Court was asked by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, to try and fast track it. The Supreme Court said no, unanimously. That led Trump to kind of declare victory, saying, oh, that shows the Supreme Court siding with me. I think actually it shows the reverse. I think what the Supreme Court did is it's letting the nation's second highest court, the DC Circuit, hear oral argument in the case next week. I think they're going to make a fast decision. It'll throw Trump's claim out. And I suspect the US Supreme Court won't even hear the case. because it's such a bogus argument. Trump's best point is, well, the Supreme Court has never said presidents can be subject to the criminal law. That's just because it's just not come up really outside of Richard Nixon a little bit. Presidents generally aren't violating the criminal law willy-nilly, but Donald Trump was. So we will, we'll watch it and see, but I suspect that that trial for election interference at the federal level, it's right now scheduled to be March 4th. I think it can go in March. It might be a couple of weeks delay or something like that, but I do not see a dramatic delay at this point. And if you're Donald Trump, that's the thing you have to be worried about. He's tried so hard, tooth and nail, Katie, to try and prevent that trial from happening. But right now, it sure looks like it's going to be on.
But isn't Super Tuesday? I should have looked this up, Neal. Sorry. Isn't Super Tuesday in early March? I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't
Well,
follow the elections,
I'll ask Julia and Courtney.
but March 4th has been set for a long, long time.
There's also some wild card that the Washington Post reported on in December that might delay the trial. And it's the question of whether the Justice Department overused a criminal statute against obstructing a government proceeding when it came to the January 6th riot. Do you understand this wild card? Do you know anything about that?
It's technical, but it does affect one of Trump's charges about obstruction of an official proceeding. And the court right now is going to hear the case involving the challenge of someone else. The question is basically whether that statute is about destroying documents or about more than destroying documents. This was about part of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act about white-collar crime and the like. But it does have broad language in there that has been used to convict hundreds of people in the January 6th trials. And I don't suspect that this will delay the trial at the end of it. I mean, I think that Trump can make his objections to the statute and his reading, and the court can deal with that, after the jury makes its final decision.
So you don't think it's going to have a huge impact?
I don't think so, because I also think that the appeal is not looking too great for Donald Trump's team. Yeah.
We have the classified documents case in Florida. He faces 40 federal charges over accusations he kept top secret documents at Mar-a-Lago, thwarted government demands to return them. That trial date is May 20th. Judge Aileen Cannon presiding, who's previously been criticized for delaying the pretrial process. She was appointed by Donald Trump. Big, right, is my understanding, I thought, and very sympathetic to him. So what's the latest on that, Neal?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the fact that she was appointed by Trump doesn't say much to me. I mean, there's lots of Trump judges who apply the law fairly and the like. I do think that her decisions last year were very, very questionable and slapped down by the very conservative Court of Appeals. And she is now looking like she's still delaying things in an unwarranted way. So I am concerned about it because this is a very serious criminal trial, Katie. I was National Security Advisor at the Justice Department. The idea that anyone would take these documents anywhere out of any sensitive compartmented information facility is mind-boggling to me.
Having said that, Neal, I think a lot of people felt that, Mike Pence had classified documents. Joe Biden had classified documents. Remember,
real difference between one document and dozens, and between an inadvertent document that might have gotten buried in something else, and these, which Trump evidently, according to the indictment, was actually showing to people at Mar-a-Lago after he was no longer president. So if that's it's night and day. Obviously, there's always room. Prosecutors always want to give room for people to make mistakes and not, throw them in jail, lock them up, to use Donald Trump's phrase. But this doesn't appear to be what Donald Trump did. Again, if that's his claim that it's all an accident and he didn't know anything about it, he should be trying to prove that up at trial instead of being afraid of the trial, which is how he's been acting.
But do you think that this will be delayed beyond May 20th?
I think there's a risk, given the way this judge's rulings, that may happen. And again, that would be unfortunate. The American people should know, in the context of a criminal trial with Trump given all of the rights that criminal defendants get, which are massive, and if he can't defend himself after that, that should tell the American people a lot.
New York's state hush money payment. He's facing 34 charges connected to a 2016 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. That trial date is March 25th.
Yeah, and again, that's one which does look like it's going. Obviously, paying money to a porn star is not of the same gravity as the kinds of crimes we're talking about, whether stealing documents, national security documents from, and putting them at Mar-a-Lago, or overturning an election, and fomenting violence in the Capitol. Those are obviously about as grave as it gets. So it's a little weird to talk about all of this in the same breath, but obviously you're going through all of Trump's trials, and that is certainly one.
What about the New York civil fraud case? Letitia James contends Trump used fraud to inflate his net worth to get more favorable loans and insurance rates. Both sides are scheduled to submit filings on January 5th, and they'll then present closing arguments on January 11th. The AG is seeking a penalty of up to $250 million and the dissolution of Donald Trump's New York business licenses.
Yeah, so the latter part is obviously of most significance for Donald Trump. I mean, he cares about money. He doesn't appear to be particularly good at actually, managing it, and so I think he's got to worry a lot about that case.
The Georgia election interference case, not much has been happening with that case. He faces 13 state charges for allegedly trying to undo the election results in Georgia. 18 people have been charged. 4 have pled guilty. So what's going on right now on in Georgia right now?
Well, there's been some litigation in the Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals, about whether Mark Meadows, as a federal official, could remove his case to federal court, so it couldn't be in state court.
And that's
he just lost
he's
that.
been trying, and he wants that, right?
He does.
Why?
And so, because, for one thing, federal court's not televised, and Trump and all of his minions are very afraid of this trial being televised, and Georgia trials are televised in state court. I think that's probably, a good part of the reason. It may be that he's made some strategic judgments about who would be a better judge and so on, who knows? But at the end of the day, his removal argument is pretty weak, and that's what the trial court has already found.
And so, other than that, and Mark Meadows, how strong a case do you think this Georgia
The
case
Georgia
is?
case is extremely strong, with very compelling, testimony, it looks like, from a bunch of witnesses. I think the hard part is just, when is that trial going to happen? Fani Willis, the district attorney, has already signaled it's not going to be for a while. And, I think if it doesn't happen before the election, then Trump is going to have a pretty good argument that he can nullify a state prosecution as the president.
If he wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So of all these other cases, where do you think Donald Trump is the most vulnerable, Neal, when all is said and done?
Yeah, I think that the Judge Chutkan's trial date of March 4th looks like it's going to hold. Those are incredibly serious charges.
You're talking about the insurrection charge.
Correct. And so I think that is a clear and present danger to Donald Trump right now, and he knows it. That's why he's trying every trick in the book to try and delay that trial. He does not want to face the reckoning before a jury.
Is there a possibility, sorry to belabor this point, but is there a possibility if the Supreme Court hears the article, the Article 14, Section 3, Colorado decision in February, could they have how long will it take for them to
could decide that case pretty quickly?
So that might predate all these other trials, including the DC one, right?
Yeah, it's possible that the Supreme Court could decide that case before March 4th. Yes.
And just again, do you really think it's, I know you think it's more than plausible. Do you think it's likely that they will decide, the Supreme Court, to remove Donald Trump from the ballot as president, as the Republican candidate, because of this constitutional, this portion of the Constitution?
Yeah, I think if it's argued that way, the way I said, which is, to appeal to conservative justices and their methodology, It's a totally winnable case. Yes.
And who will try that case, or how will they decide?
I mean, it's in the United States Supreme Court, so the 9 justices will.
No. Who will be the lawyers?
Oh, I don't know.
How do they pick that? Sorry, that's probably a dumb question.
No, not dumb at all. It's just whoever the client is, the client will get to decide who the lawyer will be.
The client being
These voters, that have filed the lawsuit.
in Colorado.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I got it. So that's the case that'll be heard. It won't, will there be the opposite side? Now I'm really showing my ignorance about how the Supreme Court works, Neal.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Who will defend, who will argue against the Colorado
Oh, I
law?
suspect Trump's lawyer, whoever that may be.
Okay. Well, it's going to be a really interesting year. Everyone says tumultuous.
Yeah.
Neal, you're so helpful in guiding us through this. I'm grateful to have you have these conversations with me, and I've missed talking to you about this stuff.
I miss it too, so my pleasure.
Kind of.
And
I miss seeing you. I don't really miss talking about this.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, very nice to see you, and thanks to everyone.
Yeah,
all
thanks
people
everyone
watching,
for watching.
Happy New Year.
If it was helpful, please leave comments in the comments section. Anyway, thanks, Neal. Okay, bye.